Welcome to Echo 321, Study Session 7, the Neoclassical Counter-Revolution, Market Fundamentalism. Introduction. Neoclassical Counter-Revolution, also known as neoliberalism, argues that underdevelopment is the result of poor resource allocation due to incorrect pricing policies and too much state intervention by overly active developing nation governments, and that state intervention often slow the pace of economic growth. The most popular neoclassical growth model is the Solow growth model. We will discuss the three main approaches of the neoclassical counter-revolution in this session. Learning outcome. When you study this session, you should be able to 1. Explain the three main approaches of the neoclassical counter-revolution. 2. Explain the main features of Solow growth model. 3. Discuss the implications of Solow growth model. Overview of the neoclassical counter-revolution. The roots of neoclassical counter-revolution go back to the 1980s, when conservative governments in US, Canada, Great Britain, and Germany came into power. This so-called counter-revolution favors supply-side macroeconomic policies, rational expectation theories, and privatization of public corporations. In developing countries, it called for freer markets and dismantling of public ownership and state regulation. The central argument of this school of thought is that underdevelopment results from poor resource allocation due to incorrect pricing policies and too much state intervention. The neoliberal argues that permitting competitive free market to flourish, privatizing the state enterprises, promoting free trade and export expansion, creating incentive for international investors, and eliminating state regulations and price distortions in factor, product, and financial markets will stimulate economic efficiency and growth. Both economic efficiency and growth will be stimulated. According to this school, underdevelopment do not occur because of predatory policies of development countries, but because of state intervention, corruption, inefficiency, and lack of economic incentives. In this view, therefore, development is a matter of promoting free trade for resource allocation and stimulating of economic development. The neoliberalism can be divided into three approaches, namely free market, the public choice, and the market-friendly approaches. Free market approach. This approach argues that markets alone are efficient. Product markets provide the best signals for investment in new activities. Labor market responds to these new industries in appropriate ways. Producers know best what to produce and how to produce it efficiently. And product and factor prices reflect accurate scarcity values of goods and resources now and in the future. Competition is effective, technology is freely available and nearly costless to absorb. Information is also perfect and costless to obtain. Under these circumstances, any government's intervention in the economy is by definition distortionary and counterproductive. Free market advocates have tended to assume that developing world markets are efficient and that imperfections are of little consequence. Public choice theory. This approach is also known as new political economy approach. According to this approach, government can do nothing right because politicians, bureaucrats, citizens, and state act solely from a self-interested perspective, using their power and authority for their own selfish end. Citizens use political influence to obtain special benefits from government policies and restrict access to important resources. Politicians use government resources to consolidate and maintain position of power and authority. Bureaucrats and public officials use a position to extract bribes from rent-seeking citizens and to operate protected business on the side. States use their powers to confiscate private property from individuals. The net result of this behavior is not only a misallocation of resources, but also a general reduction in individual freedoms. Therefore, according to this approach, minimal government is the best government. Market-friendly approach. This approach is the most recent variant of neoclassical counter-revolution. It is mainly developed by the economists of the World Bank. This approach recognizes that there are imperfections in the product and factor markets of developing countries, and that the government do have a key role to play in facilitating the operations of markets through non-selective intervention. For example, by investing in physical and social infrastructure, healthcare facilities, and educational institutions, and by providing a suitable climate for private enterprise. The market-friendly approach also differs from the free market and public choice schools of thought by accepting the notion that market failures are most widespread in developing countries in areas such as investment coordination and environmental outcomes. Moreover, phenomena such as missing or incomplete information, externalities in skill creation and learning, and economies of scale in production are also endemic to the markets of developing countries. The recognition of these phenomena has given rise to the newest school of development theory, namely the new or endogenous growth. Traditional neoclassical growth theory, solo growth model. Another cornerstone of the neoclassical free market argument is the assertion that liberalization of national market draws additional domestic and foreign investment and thus increases the rate of capital accumulation. In terms of GNP growth, this is equivalent to raising domestic savings rates, which enhances capital labor ratios and per capita income in capital poor developing countries. Traditional neoclassical models of growth are a direct outgrowth of the Harrod-Dommer and Solow model, which both stress the importance of savings. The Solow neoclassical growth model expanded on the Harrod-Dommer formulation by adding a second factor, labor, and introducing a third independent variable, technology, to the growth equation. Unlike fixed coefficient, constant return to scale assumptions of the Harrod-Dommer model, Solow's neoclassical growth model exhibited diminishing returns to labor and capital separately and constant return to both factors jointly. Technological progress became the residual factor explaining long-term growth, and its level was assumed by Solow and other growth theorists to be determined exogenously, that is, independently of other factors. The major shortcomings of Harrod-Dommer model, which caused the knife-edge problem, was the assumption that capital and labor had to be combined in technologically fixed proportion. The neoclassical growth model overcomes this problem by allowing capital and labor to be used in variable proportion. This then allows the capital output ratio to be a policy variable and to be used to the best advantage of any country given its unique characteristics. It can easily be shown that from a production function of the form y equals f of KL, which equals AK for L beta, the following expressions can be derived. GY equals GA plus AGK plus beta GL, where GY, GK, and GL are respectively the annual rates of growth of output, capital, and the labor force. This type of expression for the rate of growth in continuous time involves taking logarithm of the variables in the production function and differentiating with respect to time. The constant alpha and beta are output elasticity with respect to capital and labor respectively. Under the assumptions of constant return to scale and competitive factor markets, they add up to 1 and are equal to the shares of capital and labor respectively in the national income. The term GA represents growth in output, which is not attributable to growth of the factor input, capital, and labor. It is also known as total factor productivity growth and in growth accounting as the residual. Recalling the discussion of the concept of development and the definition of economic development, an expression for growth of output per head is arguably more relevant than that of growth of output. Assuming the population growth rate and the labor growth rate are equal, equation 7.1 can be manipulated as follows. GY equals GA plus alpha GK plus beta GL. GY minus GL equals GA plus alpha GK plus beta GL minus GL, which equals GL plus alpha of GK minus GL. Assuming there are constant return to scale, this equation states that growth of output per head equals the growth rate of total factor productivity plus some factors of the growth rate of the capital labor ratio or capital per head. Technical progress is exogenous in the solo neoclassical growth model, but you should know what factors explain it, both in the context of growth accounting and endogenous growth theory. Most textbooks derive what Solow called the fundamental equation of his model, which in the absence of technical progress and depreciation is dk equals S of k minus nk, where dk is the change in the capital labor ratio, SF of k is savings per worker, and nk is investment required to keep capital labor ratio constant. You are not expected to derive equation 7.3, but you should understand its implication. Essentially, the change in capital labor ratio, K, will be positive, negative, or zero if SF of K is greater than NK, comma, SF of K is less than NK, and SF of K is equal to NK respectively. The model predicts that with given values of S and N, the economy will achieve a steady state in which the capital stock and output both growth at the exogenously determined labor force growth rate. The demonstration of this, consider figure 7.1, in which per capita income, production function, which exhibit diminishing return to capital, the per capita savings function and the capital requirement line NK are plotted against the capital labor ratio. Initially, SFK is greater than NK. Then K will rise because savings per worker is greater than required to keep the capital labor ratio constant. Conversely, if SF of K is less than NK, then K will fall because investment per worker is less than required to keep the capital labor ratio constant. When SF of K equals NK, that is, where K equals K asterisk, there is no inducement for K and hence Y to change. This is the steady state. Now consider the identity. Y over L equals Y over K times K over L. The relevance of this model to economic development is that it puts a different perspective on the roles of savings and capital accumulation from that of Arrow's-Drummond model. A once and for all rise in the savings rate will, other things being equal, cause only a temporary rise in the growth rate of output and output per head. An increase in the savings rate to S will shift the savings function to SF of K, intersecting NK at V, and cause K to rise to K1 and output per head to rise from Y rate to Y1. Thereafter, however, identity 7.4 holds and the capital stock and output again grow at rate N. Thus, for a given N and in the absence of technical progress, continuous rises in output per head requires continuous increases in the savings rate. There will be an upper limit to a country's savings rate. A similar manipulation can be done for the growth of labor force. A once-off fall in N, represented in the diagram by a downward rotation of NK, will cause only a once-off increase in the growth of output and in output per head, although lowering the population growth rate might be desirable for other reasons. The Solow model demonstrates that such a demographic change will not result in a permanently higher growth of per capita income. A once-off technological improvement will shift the production and savings function upward. The savings function will intersect the capital requirement line at a higher capital labor ratio. The capital labor ratio rises, and this results in a higher output per worker as given by the new production function. Thus, according to the model, continuous technical progress is required for continuous increases in output per head or per head to be achieved. Critics of Solow model. The Solow model has been criticized for a number of reasons. First, it relies on efficient market, but developing countries may exhibit dualistic features. Adjusting the factor intensity of production in response to price changes may require a long time, and hence developing countries may be, in effect, operating with fixed capital labor ratio. The secondary major criticism is that the model predicts convergence, that is, the per capita output of countries converge over time. Assume there are two countries, one with high and one with low per capita income. Assume further that both have the same exogenous saving rate and the same exogenous growth rate of technical progress. The country with the lower per capita income will have a low capital labor ratio and a high marginal productivity of capital. Thus, since the savings rate is identical in the two countries and capital will flow from the high income country where the marginal productivity of capital is lower, the low per capita income country will experience faster capital accumulation and faster growth of output. Hence, the per capita income in the two countries will converge. In other words, there will be a negative relationship between per capita income and growth of per capita income. This result is not observed, and empirical evidence shows that while there has been convergence between OECD countries, some of the newly industrialized countries, NICS, there still exists very wide per capita income differential between the developed countries and most of the developing countries. Implication of neoclassical counter-revolution. Like the dependency revolution of 1970s, the neoclassical counter-revolution of the 1980s has its origin in an economic cum ideological view of the developing world and its problem. Whereas dependence theorists saw underdevelopment as an externally induced phenomenon, neoclassical revisionists saw the problem as an internally induced phenomenon caused by the domestic government. Regarding less government and free markets, there can be no doubt on strictly efficiency criteria that market price allocation usually does a better job than state intervention. However, the economies of developing countries are so different in structure and organization from their Western counterparts that the behavioral assumptions and policy precepts are often sometimes questionable and often incorrect. In developing countries, competitive markets simply do not exist. Consumers as a whole are rarely sovereign about anything. Information is limited, markets are fragmented, and much of the economy is still non-monetized. There are widespread externalities of production and consumption, as well as discontinuities in production and incompatibility of technology. Producers, private or public, have great power in determining market prices and quantities sold. Although monopolies of resource purchase and product sale are common phenomena, the neoclassical theory of monopoly offers little insight into the activities of public and private corporations. Decision rules can vary widely with social setting, so that profit maximization may be a low priority objective in state-owned enterprises. Finally, the invincible hand often acts not to promote the general welfare, but rather to lift up those who are already well off while pushing down the vast majority. The argument of efficiency of price allocation in free market has much to offer. Similarly, enlightened governments can also make effective use of prices as incentives for influencing socially optimal resource allocation. However, institutional and political structures of many developing countries often make the attainment of appropriate policies based on market or enlightened regulation difficult endeavor. Due to widespread institutional rigidity and socio-economic inequality, both markets and government typically fail. It is not simply an either-or question based on ideological learning. Rather, it is a matter of assessing each individual country's particular situation. Development economists can choose neoclassical concepts and models that can address issues of development and discard those that cannot. Summary. In this study session, you were exposed to neoclassical counter-revolution, which argues that underdevelopment is the result of poor resource allocation due to incorrect pricing policies and too much state intervention by overly active developing nations' government. This state intervention often slows the pace of economic growth. The belief is that by allowing free market to flourish, privatizing state owned enterprises, promoting free trade and export expansion, both economic efficiency and economic growth will be stimulated. It can be explained under three approaches, namely free market, the public choice, and the market-friendly approaches. This is the end of study session 7. Thanks for listening.